He thought it was just a boy reading in a car, until Keanu Reeves looked closer and saw the truth. A mother hiding pain, a child hiding brilliance, and a car hiding everything they had left. What he did next didn't just change their lives. It uncovered a secret no one saw coming. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The air was heavy with the scent of warm asphalt and late-night exhaustion as Keanu stepped out of the soundstage. It had been a long day of shooting, the kind that left his bones aching in a familiar, almost comforting way. He had stayed behind to help the crew pack up. Now it was just past midnight, and the Los Angeles streets had grown quiet. Most of the shops were closed, save for a 24-hour grocery store a few blocks from the set. Keanu wasn't hungry exactly, but something pulled him there. Maybe a desire for silence, maybe the simplicity of pushing a cart down a near-empty aisle. He parked in the far corner of the lot where it was quietest, tucked between two dimly lit lampposts. The store's glow cast a faint yellow halo on the pavement, and the city's noise seemed to hush just at its edge. After grabbing a few basics, bananas, green tea, and a loaf of bread, Keanu made his way back to the car, plastic bag in hand. As he crossed toward his vehicle, a flicker of movement caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a streetlight glitching, but then he saw it again. A soft, rhythmic beam of light flickering from inside an old gray sedan a few spots over. He slowed his steps. There, in the front passenger seat, was a boy, maybe 10 years old. His face was tilted down, a paperback book propped open in his lap. A small flashlight rested between his fingers, bouncing slightly as he turned a page. He was completely focused, eyes scanning the lines like the words were a secret worth keeping. Keanu's steps faltered. There was something about the boy's posture, so still, so self-contained, that struck him. It wasn't just that he was reading late at night. It was how deeply he was buried in it, as if the book was the only safe place he had left. Keanu glanced around. There was no adult in sight. He took a few quiet steps closer, not enough to startle, but enough to look again. The car was old, not rusted but weathered. The back seat was crammed with bags, blankets, and a few stacked boxes. A stuffed rabbit peeked out from under a rolled sleeping bag. One of the windows was cracked just enough to let air in, but not too much. It was a home. Not meant to be, but clearly it was. The boy didn't notice him. He just kept reading, shifting slightly under a too-thin hoodie. The sleeves were pulled over his hands. Keanu stood still for a moment longer, caught between concern and respect. He didn't want to intrude, but he couldn't walk away either. Then, from the far end of the parking lot, he saw her. A woman in her 30s approached the car from the direction of the bus stop. She was moving slowly, her steps tired and deliberate. She wore hospital scrubs under a second-hand coat, and her shoes looked worn through at the soles. Her eyes flicked up as she saw Keanu standing near the car. She stiffened slightly, picking up her pace. Keanu took a careful step back, giving her space. She reached the car and opened the driver's side door. Her eyes narrowed, protective, assessing. She looked at Keanu without recognition, just caution. "I'm sorry," he said softly, holding up a hand in peace. "I didn't mean to worry you. I just noticed your son reading. He seems very focused." She didn't respond right away. She looked at him carefully, then at her son, then back. "Yeah," she said after a moment. "He loves books." Keanu gave a small smile. "That's a good thing." The woman nodded but didn't smile back. Her hand lingered on the door handle, like she was ready to leave if needed. "I was just on my way out," Keanu added, stepping back another few feet. "Have a good night." She gave a short nod. "You too." He turned and walked to his car. As he drove away, he glanced once in the rearview mirror. The boy was still reading. Keanu didn't sleep much that night. He kept thinking about the boy's face, how calm he seemed in that moment, despite everything. And the woman? His mother? how tired her eyes looked, how she stood between her child and the world with a kind of silent strength. He'd seen that look before, in others, in himself. By morning, he couldn't shake it. He'd met countless people over the years, on sets, in airports, at charity events, but something about that boy, sitting in a car with the world crumbling around him and still choosing to read, stayed with him. The next evening, Keanu drove back to the grocery store. He didn't expect to see them again. It was a big city, people moved, lives shifted. But part of him hoped. Just to know. He parked in the same area and waited. After half an hour, the gray sedan pulled in. Same car, same boy, same flashlight. Keanu watched from a distance as the mother exited the vehicle and walked toward the store. This time, she moved slower, favoring one side. As she disappeared through the sliding doors, Keanu got out of his car and approached the sedan, stopping a few feet away. The boy looked up this time. Keanu gave a small wave. The boy squinted at him, curious but not afraid. "What are you reading?" "Charlotte's Web," the boy replied. "That's a good one," Keanu said. "You like it?" The boy nodded. "It's my third time." "You must really love books." "I want to be a teacher," the boy said simply. "Teachers get to tell people stories that help them grow." Keanu felt something shift in his chest. "That's a beautiful reason." The boy smiled faintly. Keanu took a small step closer, crouching down to eye level. "I'm Keanu," he said. The boy tilted his head. "I'm Mason." "It's nice to meet you, Mason." Mason hesitated. "You're not from around here, are you?" Keanu smiled. "Not really." Before more could be said, the car door opened. The mother was back, a small grocery bag in hand. Her eyes darted to Mason, then to Keanu. Her shoulders stiffened again. "It's okay," Mason said quickly. "He was just talking." She looked at Keanu, guarded. "I just stopped to say hello," Keanu said gently. "Your son is very bright." She nodded slowly. "Thank you." "I won't keep you, just take care, okay?" She gave a short nod again, then opened the driver's side door. Keanu took that as his cue and walked back to his car. As he pulled out of the lot, he looked in the mirror one more time. Mason had returned to his book. The flashlight glowed softly in the dark. Keanu drove home in silence. He had seen poverty before. He had lived through grief. But this was something else. This was the hidden face of homelessness. Quiet, hard-working, intelligent people slipping through cracks because life hit harder than they could afford. No signs, no shouting, just quiet survival. And somehow, a boy with a flashlight and a dream had managed to cut through all the noise of Keanu's world and speak to the part of him that still believed in second chances. That night, Keanu sat at his kitchen table, the city buzzing quietly below his balcony. In front of him sat a notebook. He opened to a blank page and began to write one word at the top. "Mason." The following evening, Keanu returned to the parking lot with the same quiet focus that had brought him there the night before. He wore a plain hoodie and jeans, the kind that wouldn't draw attention. In one hand, he carried a brown paper bag filled with fresh groceries, sandwiches, apples, a box of granola bars, and a bottle of water. Tucked inside was something extra, a gently used copy of Midnight on the Moon, a book he remembered loving as a child. He didn't know exactly what he expected. Maybe the car would be gone. Maybe Erica would have decided it was too risky to stay. But as he pulled into the same corner space, there it was. The gray sedan. It sat nestled between two empty vehicles, its windows still partially covered with makeshift curtains made from dish towels and old bed sheets. The solar flower still bobbed on the dashboard. The back seat was packed tight with belongings, though he noticed now that some of the bags had been rearranged, organized, as if someone was trying to maintain a sense of order amid the chaos. The passenger window was cracked slightly. Inside, Mason sat with his legs pulled up to his chest, flashlight balanced on his knee, reading. The boy looked up as Keanu approached and instantly brightened. "You came back," Mason said. "I did," Keanu replied, crouching slightly so they were at eye level. I brought a few things. He held up the bag. Mason's eyes widened. For us? Keanu nodded. Only if it's okay with your mom. As if on cue, the driver's door creaked open. Erica stepped out, pulling her coat tightly around her shoulders. She looked tired, more than tired, but her gaze held a quiet strength that hadn't been there the day before. Her eyes went straight to Mason, then to Keanu, narrowing with cautious recognition. Keanu spoke before she had to ask. I didn't mean to intrude, he said. I wanted to make sure you both had something warm to eat. Erica hesitated. She didn't reach for the bag right away. You don't have to do this, she said. I know, Keanu replied gently. That's why I'm doing it. She studied him for a long moment, then looked at Mason, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Slowly, she reached for the bag and peeked inside. Her shoulders softened just a fraction. Thank you, she murmured. Keanu nodded. There's a book in there too, for Mason. At that, Mason sat up straighter. What book? Midnight on the Moon. Have you read it? Mason's eyes lit up. No, but I read one of the other ones. The Treehouse series, right? That's the one. Erica looked between the two of them. Something in her face shifted. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was no longer fear either. You always this generous with strangers? She asked. Keanu offered a half smile. Only the ones who remind me what matters. Erica raised an eyebrow but didn't press him. Instead, she set the bag inside the car and leaned on the doorframe. You want to sit for a bit? She asked, surprising even herself. Keanu nodded and eased down onto the curb beside the car, the pavement still warm from the fading sun. Keanu sat with his arms resting on his knees, glancing occasionally at Mason through the window as the boy tore into the book like it was a treasure map. The street lamps overhead buzzed softly. A warm breeze drifted through the lot, rustling a candy wrapper across the pavement. For a while, no one said anything. Erica leaned against the car, arms crossed, eyes scanning the lot, the way someone does when they've had to stay alert for too long. I never thought I'd be here, she said after a moment. Her voice was quieter now, more tired than cautious. Keanu didn't answer. He knew she wasn't asking for a response. I was a surgical tech, she continued. 10 years, operating rooms, trauma care, fast-paced, high pressure. I loved it. She paused, watching Mason flip a page. Then one day I collapsed during a double shift, burst appendix. I ignored the pain too long. I figured it was stress. By the time they operated, the infection had already started. Keanu nodded slowly. It's serious. Yeah, it was. The recovery took months. I missed too many shifts, lost the job, bills didn't wait. She exhaled hard through her nose. You think there's a cushion, you know? A little savings, maybe some friends to lean on, but when things get bad, people vanish. They have their own problems. Keanu said nothing. He didn't need to. She went on. I sold everything that wasn't nailed down. The apartment went next. I tried shelters, but they're not built for people with kids. Too dangerous, too unpredictable. So we ended up here. Her voice tightened. I park in different lots during the week, rotate. Grocery stores are safer. Security guards don't hassle you as much, especially if you keep the car clean. I work at a motel now, laundry and housekeeping, night shifts mostly. It pays just enough to keep gas in the tank and food on the seat. Keanu looked at her with steady eyes. And you still teach him? Every day. Her mouth tugged into the beginning of a smile. He's the only reason I haven't given up. Mason popped his head out of the window. Mom makes math fun. She turns it into missions. Erica shook her head and laughed softly. I try. Keanu leaned back on his hands and looked up at the sky. A plane passed overhead, blinking red against the indigo. He waited a few beats before speaking again. I know how it feels, he said, to fall behind, to feel like you're running out of road. Erica turned to look at him fully for the first time. You don't look like someone who's had to sleep in a car. I didn't, he said. But I've had my own kind of losses, different kind. Same silence. They both sat with that for a moment. "I'm not here to fix anything," Keanu added. "I just wanted you to know you're not invisible." Erica's eyes glistened slightly. She looked away, blinking hard. "You're different," she said quietly. Keanu nodded. So is Mason. Mason had climbed into the back seat now, curled up beneath one of the thinner blankets, the book still open in his lap. His eyes were heavy, but he kept reading, one hand idly stroking the worn spine as if it gave him comfort. "Loves learning," Erica said softly. "Sometimes I think it's the only thing keeping him steady." Keanu smiled gently. "You're doing more than most people with 5 times the resources." Erica gave a tired laugh. "Some days I feel like I'm holding him together with duct tape and bedtime stories." Keanu looked at her for a long moment. "He's going to remember the stories more than anything else," he said. "The duct tape won't matter." She met his gaze. "You really believe that?" "I do." A small silence settled between them again. This one felt different, not heavy, just honest. Keanu rose to his feet, brushing the dust off his jeans. "I should go," he said, "but if it's all right, I'd like to come back tomorrow." Erica didn't answer right away. Then she nodded. "All right, but no more surprises." He smiled. "Just books, and maybe a few apples." As he walked away, Mason's voice floated through the window, barely audible, reading aloud under the dim light. Keanu paused and listened. He didn't say anything. He just smiled and kept walking. The next week settled into a quiet rhythm. Every evening just before sunset, Keanu returned to the parking lot. He never came empty-handed. Sometimes it was books, other times a new set of pencils, a blanket, or just fresh fruit. Nothing flashy, nothing overwhelming, always simple, thoughtful, and quiet. By the third evening, Erica no longer looked surprised when she saw him. She'd offer a nod, sometimes a tired smile, before heading off to the motel where she picked up evening shifts cleaning rooms. She trusted Mason with Keanu now, at least for those couple of hours. Mason would slide into the passenger seat and talk non-stop the moment Erica disappeared from view. Keanu didn't mind. In fact, he looked forward to it. Mason had a way of talking like every subject was connected to another. One minute it was space and stars, the next it was frogs and ecosystems, then suddenly he was explaining how he wanted to be a teacher because some people explain things and make you feel smart just for listening. He had a spiral-bound notebook he carried everywhere, filled with doodles, words he liked the sound of, and sketched diagrams of imaginary inventions. He once showed Keanu a page with an elaborate blueprint labeled "Portable Peace Machine." Keanu pointed to it. "What does it do?" Mason grinned. "It lets people hear each other's thoughts for 5 minutes, so they stop yelling." Keanu laughed softly. "That might be the most useful machine ever made." "I'm still working on it," Mason said with complete sincerity. Sometimes they'd walk laps around the lot while Mason talked, or sit on the hood of Keanu's car eating peanut butter crackers. Other nights, they just read side by side, quietly turning pages under the lamp-post glow. Keanu noticed Mason never once complained about their situation. He never mentioned the car, never asked why life was so hard. But one night, after a long conversation about comets and craters, Mason paused and looked up. "I miss pillows," he said. Keanu blinked. "Pillows?" "Yeah," Mason said, shrugging. "The kind that don't fold when you roll over. The ones that stay cool." He didn't say it with anger, just with memory. Keanu nodded slowly. "I get that." They sat in silence for a moment. "You miss anything else?" Keanu asked gently. Mason stared at the sky for a long time before answering. "Ceilings. The ones with little bumps. You know the kind you stare at when you're trying to fall asleep?" Keanu's chest tightened, but he didn't speak. Mason turned to him. "I'm okay, though. Mom says we're in the middle of the story, not the end." Keanu gave him a quiet smile. "She's right." As the days passed, Erica began opening up more. Not in long speeches or teary confessions, but in passing comments, worn-out glances, and the subtle relief that came from knowing someone else saw them. One evening, she arrived back at the car later than usual. Keanu had stayed with Mason, helping him solve math problems using a deck of playing cards. When Erica walked up, her face was flushed from the heat of the motel's laundry room, and her fingers were red from folding towels straight out of the dryer. She dropped her bag into the back seat and leaned on the open door, catching her breath. "You okay?" Keanu asked. She nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. "Just tired. Long night." And a guest complained because the shampoo bottle wasn't facing the right direction. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" Erica let out a dry laugh. "Some people have nothing better to do." She looked at Mason, who was scribbling in his notebook with a grin on his face. "I used to work in operating rooms," she said suddenly. "Knew how to assist in spine surgery. Now I fold towels and scrub floors for people who never see my face." Keanu listened. No interruptions. "I know I should be grateful," she added quickly. "It's a job, it's clean, it's safe, but some nights it's hard not to feel like I disappeared." "You haven't," Keanu said. She didn't respond right away. Then she let out a long, shaky breath. "It's hard to ask for help," she admitted, "even when it's offered with kindness. You spend so much time trying to prove you can stand on your own that when someone reaches out, it feels like failure." Keanu shook his head gently. "It's not." She glanced at him. "You sure?" "I'm sure." That night, before Erica climbed into the car to rest, Keanu handed her a folded bag with a small notepad and pen inside. "What's this?" she asked. "You said you disappeared," Keanu replied. "Maybe it's time to start writing yourself back in." She looked at the notebook like it was made of glass. "I used to journal," she said softly. "Stopped when things got bad." "Maybe. That's when you needed it most." She gave a small nod and slid the notebook into her coat pocket. The bond between them grew, not out of rescue, but of recognition. Keanu never brought up his fame, and neither Erica nor Mason asked. It wasn't that they didn't know. It just didn't matter here. They treated him like a man with groceries and time, and in return, he gave them something they hadn't had in a long time: consistency. Mason began calling him Professor K, especially on nights when Keanu brought science magazines or helped him run little experiments with vinegar and baking soda in old soda bottles. One evening, Mason asked, "Did you always know what you wanted to be?" Keanu thought for a long moment before answering. "No. I just knew I didn't want to become someone who forgot how to care." Mason nodded. "That's a good answer." He tapped his pencil on his notebook. "I think I'll remember that." The next night, as the city buzzed quietly in the background, Keanu sat on the curb while Mason practiced reading a paragraph from a college-level astronomy book. The boy stumbled over the word photosphere, paused, looked up, then nailed it on the second try. Keanu gave him a quiet thumbs up. Erica joined them, holding 2 cups of coffee, one of which she handed to Keanu without asking. It had become a habit now, a silent exchange of warmth and familiarity. "I used to think we had to wait for a miracle," she said, watching Mason study. "But maybe we just needed a witness." Keanu looked at her. "You've always been more than your situation." She smiled. "Still, hard to believe some days." Mason glanced up from his book. "Mom says hard days mean you're still trying." Erica smiled at her son, brushing a curl from his forehead. "That's right." As Keanu rose to leave, Mason stopped him with a question. "Do you think stories really change people?" Keanu didn't answer right away. "They don't change the world," he said, "but they change the people who do." Mason nodded. "Then I'm gonna write one someday. About this." Keanu looked at him, voice calm but certain. "I hope you do." The idea came to Keanu on a Thursday night, after Mason had spent the better part of an hour trying to describe the taste of pancakes he remembered from a birthday years ago. He didn't remember the name of the place, only that the syrup was warm, and his mom had smiled more than usual. Keanu had nodded, listening, filing the details away, and the next evening, instead of pulling into the lot with grocery bags or books, He came with something different. "Hey," he said as he approached their car. Erica looked up from the driver's seat, already halfway through organizing her next shift schedule on a folded printout from the motel. Mason's head popped out from the backseat window, eyes bright. "I was wondering," Keanu continued, "if you two would let me buy you dinner tonight." Erica hesitated, her eyes narrowed just slightly, not in suspicion, but in that quiet calculation she had developed after months of navigating every offer with caution. Mason, on the other hand, sat up straight. "A real dinner?" he asked. Keanu smiled. "A booth, menus, silverware that doesn't bend, the works." Erica hesitated, then glanced at her son. She saw the flicker of hope in his eyes, the kind that hadn't been there for a while. "Where?" she asked. "About a block away. Little corner diner. It's quiet, clean, and they make a milkshake that'll ruin you for all others." Mason gasped dramatically. "Can I get chocolate?" Keanu nodded. "With whipped cream and a cherry?" Erica sighed, then laughed under her breath. "All right, but only if I pay next time." Keanu raised his eyebrows but didn't argue. 10 minutes later, the three of them walked into the diner together. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, and the warmth inside wrapped around them like a forgotten comfort. Booths lined the windows, the vinyl seats cracked in spots but clean. The air smelled of coffee, butter, and the faint sweetness of syrup. A waitress named Sandy, middle-aged with tired eyes and a kind smile, led them to a booth in the back. As they slid into the booth, Keanu noticed the way Erica moved slowly, as if unsure she was allowed to relax. Mason, meanwhile, stared at the menu like it was a rare comic book. "This is nice," he whispered, almost reverently. "Really, really nice." Keanu handed him a laminated kids menu with games on the back. "I think the pancakes are better here than the birthday ones." Mason grinned, challenge accepted. When the waitress returned to take their order, Mason didn't hesitate. "Chocolate milkshake, pancakes, and a side of scrambled eggs," Erica ordered modestly, as if the weight of money still pressed against her even now. Keanu ordered the house special without looking at the prices. As the food arrived, steaming and full, Mason's eyes widened. "I forgot food could look like this," he said. Erica's hands trembled slightly as she picked up her fork. She tried to hide it, but Keanu noticed. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, biting her lip. "I'm just not used to this, sitting at a table, being served." Keanu leaned forward, his voice low. "You're allowed to feel comfortable. You're allowed to enjoy it." She looked at him for a long second, then finally let herself smile. The conversation that night flowed more easily than Keanu expected. Mason talked with his mouth half full, telling stories about books he was reading and the adventures he imagined from the back seat of their car. He described planets he wanted to visit, lessons he wanted to teach, and the kind of school he'd build if he ever had the chance. "There'd be a quiet room for kids who need to think," he said, "and bean bags, lots of bean bags." Keanu laughed. "You might be onto something." Erica was quieter but not withdrawn. She watched Mason closely, her eyes softening with every smile he gave. As she sipped her coffee, her shoulders slowly lowered, like she was remembering what it felt like not to carry the entire world for a night. "You really mean it when you say this isn't charity," she said quietly to Keanu, after Mason excused himself to go look at the vintage jukebox near the restroom. He nodded. "I do." She looked down at her plate, the last few bites untouched. "I just keep thinking there's a catch, that the other shoe's about to drop." Keanu tilted his head. "You've been living with too many shoes in the air." She gave a soft laugh, then sighed. "You don't know how hard it is to accept help, even when it's right in front of you. You spend so much time proving you don't need anything that you forget how to receive kindness." Keanu leaned forward slightly. "What you're doing for Mason isn't survival, it's strength. And it deserves more than parked cars and skipped meals." Erica looked at him. "You really believe that?" "I do, with everything in me." She nodded, her eyes misty. "It means more than you know." Just then Mason returned, wide-eyed. Family have Elvis on that thing. Keanu grinned. Tell me you didn't play Jailhouse Rock. Mason shook his head. I picked the one from Lilo and Stitch. Erica chuckled. Of course you did. They lingered at the table longer than any of them planned, the kind of meal that didn't feel rushed or forced. No one looked at the clock. No one asked what came next. It was a pause, a deep breath they didn't know they needed. Eventually, Mason began to yawn, his energy crashing all at once. Erica started gathering their things. Keanu caught Sandy, the waitress, by the counter while the two were in the restroom. He leaned in close, speaking low. Can I prepay for the next few visits for them? Sandy raised an eyebrow. Like, how many? Let's start with 2 months. A couple meals a week. Just quiet ones. Nothing flashy. Sandy looked back toward the booth where Erica and Mason were returning. You know them? I'm a friend, Keanu said simply. She nodded. All right, I'll make it happen. Keanu handed over his card and scribbled a note on the back of a receipt. No mention, just kindness. As they stepped out into the cool night air, Mason looked up at Keanu. Thank you. This was the best night in a long time. Erica echoed the sentiment with a glance, her voice too full to speak just yet. Keanu smiled. You both deserve more than survival. They walked slowly back toward the parking lot, their footsteps light against the quiet sidewalk. The street lamps overhead cast long shadows, and the distant hum of traffic felt less harsh than usual. Mason held Erica's hand with one of his and clutched the to-go milkshake cup with the other, sipping the last of it through a bent straw. Keanu walked a few steps behind them, not out of distance, but out of respect. He watched the way Mason leaned into his mother, how Erica stood a little taller now. Something in her gait had changed. The weight hadn't disappeared, but she wasn't dragging it alone anymore. When they reached the car, Erica turned to him. You didn't have to do any of this, she said, voice steady. I know, but I'm glad you did. Mason tugged on Keanu's sleeve. Can we go back next week? Keanu crouched down. You bet. Maybe next time I'll try the waffles. Keanu grinned. That's a bold move. Erica opened the car door and helped Mason climb into the back. Before she followed, she looked at Keanu one last time. I didn't forget how to be grateful, she said. I just forgot what it felt like to receive something good without a price. Keanu nodded. There is no price, just people who still care. As the car pulled away into the night, Keanu stood in the lot alone for a moment, the scent of syrup still clinging to his coat, the sound of Mason's laughter echoing in his memory. He turned toward his own car, the soft words repeating in his mind like a promise. You both deserve more than survival. It started with a quiet phone call. Keanu sat alone at his kitchen table, the lights dim, a blank page open in front of him. His notebook was filled with scribbled observations about Mason. His curiosity, his intelligence, the way he absorbed stories like they were air. And about Erica, her pride, her exhaustion, her quiet strength. He'd been thinking about them more than usual since that night at the diner. He kept hearing Mason say, Can we go back next week? And Erica's quiet words, I forgot what it felt like to receive something good without a price. Keanu didn't want to rescue them. That had never been the goal. But he knew, deeply, that they needed more than food and a kind voice in a parking lot. They needed rest, real rest, a place to breathe. So he called an old friend, someone he'd worked with years ago on a low-profile housing initiative in East LA. The foundation was quiet by design. It offered transitional apartments to families living in vehicles, referrals through shelters, churches, and caseworkers, never headlines. The paperwork was done under a different name, funded discreetly by Keanu and a few others who didn't want recognition. Only change. I've got a mother and son, Keanu said. They've been living in their car. She works nights at a motel. He's brilliant, 10 years old, reads like a college kid. They're both holding on, but barely. His friend didn't hesitate. We've got an opening. It's not a luxury suite, but it's warm, clean, and safe. 2 bedrooms. shared kitchen and counseling support on site. Keanu let out a slow breath. Perfect. I want to cover the costs myself. Quietly. Understood. I'll set it up. Give me 48 hours. 2 nights later, Erica and Mason arrived at the same grocery store lot just before sunset, as they always did. Keanu was already there, leaning against his car, a folded piece of paper in his hand. "What's that?" Erica asked as she stepped out of the driver's seat. "Directions," Keanu replied. "To a place I'd like to take you." Erica looked wary. "What kind of place?" "A safe one," he said. "Just trust me." "One stop." She hesitated. "Mason has schoolwork, I have laundry." "I know. This won't take long." Mason climbed out, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Where are we going?" "You'll see," Keanu said, smiling. They followed him cautiously as he drove through side streets and quiet intersections until they reached a small building tucked between a community center and a church. It didn't look like much. No giant sign, no long line, no cameras. Just a clean brick exterior and a simple welcome mat in front of the double doors. Keanu parked and got out first. A woman in her 40s met them at the front, holding a clipboard. She wore jeans, sneakers, and a welcoming smile. "Hi there," she said, looking at Erica and Mason. "You must be the Westwoods?" Erica blinked. "Yes." "That's us." "Follow me," the woman said, opening the door. "We've been expecting you." Erica turned slowly to Keanu, confusion settling in. "What is this?" "Just take a look," he said softly. "Then decide." Inside, the building was bright and quiet. The entryway smelled faintly of lemon and fresh linen. A mural of birds in flight stretched across one wall, painted by local students, and a soft hum of music played from somewhere down the hall. Erica and Mason followed the woman through a short corridor, past a community kitchen with polished countertops and shelves neatly stocked with non-perishables. "We're a transitional program," the woman explained gently. "Families referred to us stay for up to 6 months. No fees, no catch. We just ask that you treat it like a stepping stone, not a destination." Erica's mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but nothing came out. They reached the last door on the left. "This one's yours," the woman said, unlocking it. Inside was a 2-bedroom unit, simple but clean. Carpeted floors, white walls that didn't smell of mildew, a small couch, a wooden table with 4 matching chairs, 2 twin beds with folded quilts. One had a stack of children's books on the nightstand. There were towels in the bathroom, a mirror above the sink, a heater humming gently in the background. Erica stepped inside and froze. Mason walked past her and went straight for the bookshelf, eyes widening at the titles. "You can stay here," the woman said. "You don't owe anything. Someone already covered your full term." Erica slowly turned toward her. "Who?" The woman smiled kindly. "They chose to remain anonymous." Erica looked back at Keanu, who had remained by the doorway the entire time. Mason climbed onto the bed and bounced once. "This feels like a trampoline." Keanu smiled. "That's how you know it's a good one." Erica took a shaky breath. Her fingers touched the corner of the dining table like she wasn't sure it was real. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Is this a mistake?" "No mistake," Keanu said. "It's for you. For both of you." "But why?" Keanu stepped forward just a little. "Because sometimes people who are trying their hardest still need someone to say, 'You've done enough, rest now.'" Erica's eyes filled instantly. She turned her face away, covering her mouth with one hand. Mason watched her quietly, his legs still swinging from the edge of the bed. "You okay, Mom?" She nodded, barely able to speak. "Yeah, baby. I'm just really okay right now." The woman handed Erica a set of keys and a welcome folder, then excused herself, closing the door behind her. Silence filled the apartment. Erica slowly moved toward the kitchen and ran her hand across the countertop. "No crumbs," she whispered. She opened the fridge, stocked with basics: milk, eggs, juice, bread. She looked at Keanu. "You did this?" He shook his head. Someone did. I just helped open the door. Erica stepped closer to him. Her voice trembled. Thank you. He nodded once, but then she did something he didn't expect. She wrapped her arms around him. Tightly. Keanu stood still, startled at first, then gently returned the embrace. She pulled back after a long moment, wiping her eyes. It's not the room, she said. It's that someone believed we were worth it without needing to be thanked. That night, Keanu left quietly. He didn't linger, didn't wait for praise or a formal goodbye. He simply nodded to Mason at the doorway, offered Erica a soft smile, and stepped out into the cool air as dusk settled gently over the city. Behind him, the warm glow of their apartment spilled onto the concrete, a symbol of something long overdue. Inside, Erica tucked Mason into bed for the first time in months without adjusting a seatbelt or covering him with a coat. The sheets were clean, the mattress was firm. Mason hugged one of the donated pillows close and looked up at the ceiling, tracing the little bumps with his fingers. You okay? Erica asked, brushing his hair back. Mason smiled sleepily. It has the bumpy kind. Erica laughed softly. Yeah, it does. He closed his eyes and whispered, This feels like a real life again. Across town, Keanu sat on his balcony, sipping tea, the city lights glittering like distant stars. In his hand, he held Mason's drawing, a sketch the boy had given him earlier that day. It showed a house with two figures in the window, smiling, and a small line at the bottom in shaky handwriting. Thank you for the middle of the story. Keanu folded it gently and placed it in his notebook. Some gifts didn't need to be explained. Some homes weren't built with walls, but with belief. And sometimes the best thing you could give someone wasn't a roof or a bed. It was the quiet reminder that they still mattered. The next Saturday morning, Keanu found himself waiting outside the neighborhood library, sipping coffee from a paper cup as the early sun warmed the sidewalk. The air smelled of jasmine and street dust, the kind of quiet morning Los Angeles rarely offered. A yellow school bus passed by slowly, empty, and a group of kids kicked a soccer ball in a nearby park. Keanu had received Mason's text the night before. Want to come to the library with me tomorrow? I found the science section. It's awesome. Followed by 3 rocket ship emojis. He smiled when he saw Mason and Erica walking up the path. Mason was wearing a backpack nearly as big as he was, bouncing with every step. Erica had her hair pulled back into a neat bun and wore a loose cardigan that looked newer than the thrifted clothes Keanu remembered. Her steps had more confidence now. The circles under her eyes were still there, but softer. Lighter. Mason waved excitedly. Professor K, you made it. Keanu returned the wave. Wouldn't miss it. Inside, the library was cool and quiet, the kind of silence that wrapped around you like a safe blanket. Rows of books lined the walls, and sunbeams slanted through tall windows, catching in the dust motes floating gently in the air. Mason led the way, already at home among the shelves. This is my favorite aisle. They have a whole section on space. Did you know you can check out 10 books at once if you have a real card? Keanu grinned. How many do you usually check out? Mason paused. All 10. Erica laughed softly. He reads them in less than a week. Keanu watched as Mason scanned titles, pulling out a thick book on astronomy and flipping through the pages with reverence. I want to start writing stuff down, Mason said. Not just reading, like my own kind of science guide. What would you call it? Keanu asked. Mason thought for a moment. Maybe the car years, like a journal, but also with experiments and lessons, like what I learned from living in a car. Erica looked up from the corner, where she'd started browsing the job board posted near the exit. She gave Keanu a small, grateful smile. She didn't need to say anything. Mason stacked 5 books in his arms. I'm going to teach other kids one day, the ones who think smart people can't come from hard places. Keanu felt something tighten in his chest. He reached out and added one more book to the pile, a slim volume titled The Science of Teaching Young Minds. Mason looked at the cover, then at Keanu. This one looks cool. "You'll need it," Keanu said. "Every great teacher keeps learning." Mason nodded seriously. They checked out at the front desk, Mason practically bouncing with the weight of his haul. Erica signed the paperwork for a new card, her hand steady as she printed their new address, her real address, on the form. Afterward, Keanu asked Mason if he had a way to type up his ideas. Mason shook his head. "Just paper, but I like typing, it feels faster." Keanu didn't say anything at the time, but he made a note to stop at the local tech repair shop later that day. That evening, Keanu returned to the apartment with a small cardboard box under his arm. Inside was a refurbished laptop. Nothing fancy, but solid. Clean keyboard, reliable battery. Preloaded with basic writing software and offline access to science articles. He had asked the shop owner to make it kid-friendly and to wipe the drive completely. The man didn't ask questions, just smiled and said, "For a good cause?" Keanu knocked on the door just before dinner. Erica answered, wearing a soft blue t-shirt and jeans, the smell of something warm and garlicky wafting in from the kitchen. "Hey," she said, surprised. "You're back." "I had a small delivery," Keanu said, holding up the box. Mason bolted from the couch when he saw him. "Did you bring a book?" "Better," Keanu said, handing over the box. Mason opened it carefully, lifting the lid like it held treasure. When he saw what was inside, his mouth fell open. "A computer?" he whispered. "Yours," Keanu said. "It's not brand new, but it works. I figured it might help with the car years." Mason clutched the box to his chest like it was made of gold. "Are you serious?" "Totally." Erica stared at it, her hand over her heart. "Keanu, we can't—" "You're not paying me back," he said gently. "This is just a tool. Mason's got a lot to say. It's time he had a way to say it." Erica swallowed hard, blinking quickly. Mason had already set the box on the table and pulled out the laptop, running his fingers over the surface like he was afraid it might disappear. "Can I start now?" he asked. Keanu grinned. "You better." Dinner was pushed back that night as Mason opened a new document and began typing. Slowly at first, hunting for each letter, but then faster. Keanu watched from the couch, sipping tea while Erica chopped vegetables. Mason's first entry was titled, "Things I Learned in the Back Seat." He read it aloud before bedtime. Number 1, he began, "The world feels scarier when you're small, but stories make it less scary." Number 2, "Some people will ignore you if you look like trouble, but some people will sit next to you and just listen." He glanced at Keanu, who gave a small nod. Number 3, "I'm not just a kid who lived in a car. I'm a kid who knows how to build something from it." Erica wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Keanu didn't say a word. After Mason went to bed, Erica sat at the small kitchen table, tracing the edge of her tea mug. "He's changing," she said softly. "This place, the books, you, it's like he's growing faster than I can keep up." "He's finding his voice," Keanu said, "and you gave him the space to do it." Erica looked at him for a long time. "You never push. You're always just there." Keanu set his cup down. "Because someone did that for me once," he said, "and it saved me in ways I didn't understand until much later." Erica nodded. "Well, you're doing that now." Keanu didn't reply. He just smiled, the weight of her words settling quietly between them. Over the next few weeks, Erica began to shift too. She picked up a part-time receptionist job at a dental clinic not far from the shelter, and then another weekend shift at a local pharmacy. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. She came home with aching feet and a light in her eyes Mason hadn't seen since before the motel days. One evening, as Keanu arrived for a visit, he noticed a small corkboard hanging near the dining table. On it were pinned 3 things: Mason's library card, Erica's pay stub, and a printed page that read, in Mason's handwriting, "The Car Years, Chapter 2 in Progress." Keanu said nothing, just smiled and looked around the room that now felt lived in. A home, not just a shelter. That night, as Mason showed him the latest chapter he'd typed, Keanu watched the boy's fingers fly across the keyboard. There was no hesitation now, no shrinking, just a steady confidence, a quiet joy. "You think other kids will read it?" Mason asked. "I think they'll need it," Keanu replied. "Just like I did." Mason looked up, grinning. And for the first time, he didn't look like a kid surviving the world. He looked like a kid shaping it. It was a Friday afternoon when the past came knocking. Erica had just returned from her morning shift at the dental clinic. Mason was typing up his latest chapter in the corner of the living room, his focus unshakable as usual. The apartment smelled faintly of laundry detergent and pasta sauce from the night before. The little home they had made in that short time was beginning to feel real, solid, safe. The knock came just after 3 p.m., sharp, deliberate, not the kind of knock from a neighbor or delivery. Erica froze mid-step in the kitchen, her breath caught without warning. Mason didn't even look up. When Erica opened the door, her expression shifted instantly. Her jaw clenched, her eyes narrowed with disbelief and confusion. Standing on the other side was a woman in her early 40s, hair pulled back tight, blazer too stiff for a casual visit. She carried a large purse and the kind of attitude that filled a room before she spoke. "Hello, Erica," the woman said. "Sandra," Erica replied, voice flat. "I heard about everything through a friend from church. I didn't know where you were." "You didn't look," Erica said. Sandra glanced past her shoulder into the apartment. Her gaze paused on Mason for half a second, then darted back. "I came because I wanted to help, especially with Mason." Erica stepped forward, blocking the doorway with her body. "What do you mean, especially with Mason?" Sandra shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I know things have been hard, but I have space, a stable home, a job. I could take Mason just until you're—" "No." The word cut through the air like a blade. "I'm not saying forever," Sandra tried again. "Just until you're on your feet." Erica didn't move. "You haven't seen us in years. You didn't show up when the hospital bills hit, or when we lost the apartment, and now you think you can walk in and split us apart?" Sandra straightened, defensive. "I didn't know it was that bad." "You didn't want to know." Sandra looked down, then back up. "He deserves stability." Erica's voice cracked. "He deserves his mother." Behind her, Mason had stopped typing. Sandra's eyes softened slightly. "I'm just trying to help." "Then don't offer to take my son," Erica snapped. "Help me by respecting what we've survived, what we're building now." There was a long pause, the kind that hung in the air like a broken bridge. Sandra shifted her bag on her shoulder. "If you change your mind—" "I won't." Sandra lingered a moment longer, then turned and walked away without another word. Erica stood frozen in the doorway until the hallway was quiet again. Then she slowly closed the door, leaned her back against it, and slid to the floor. Her face crumpled. She buried her head in her hands, breathing fast, trying to hold it in. Mason rose quietly from his seat. He didn't say anything, and Keanu, who had arrived just moments after Sandra's departure and saw the tail end from the stairwell, stepped inside gently and closed the door behind him. Keanu didn't speak right away. He just set his bag down by the door and slowly lowered himself to sit across from Erica, who was still on the floor, hands covering her face. Her shoulders trembled slightly, and her breathing came in shallow bursts. Mason stood nearby, eyes wide, unsure of what to do or say. "Do you want me to give you some space?" Keanu asked gently. Erica shook her head without lifting her face. "No, please. Just stay." So he did. For a long moment, there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of pipes. Then, finally, Erica lifted her head. Her eyes were rimmed red, cheeks streaked with tears she didn't bother to wipe. "She offered to take him," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Like I wasn't enough. Like everything I fought for wasn't real." Keanu nodded, his voice steady. "You've given him everything." She looked down at her hands. "I thought I was doing okay. I thought we were finally—" Her voice cracked. "And then she comes here, dressed like she's doing me a favor, and acts like I should hand him over like a piece of baggage." "You didn't," Keanu said quietly. But I wanted to scream, she said. I wanted to tell her what it felt like to choose between gas and food, to watch your child sleep in the back seat while pretending you weren't crying into the steering wheel. I wanted her to know how I hated myself for not having more to give. Keanu reached out, placed a hand gently on hers. You haven't fallen, he said softly. You've been carrying everything, and you're still standing. Her face twisted as the last of the tears spilled out, but now they came with relief, as if someone had finally told her the truth she'd been aching to hear. I just didn't want Mason to see me like this, she whispered. Mason stepped forward before either of them could say more. I already saw, he said gently. Erica looked up, startled. But I didn't see someone weak, Mason said, voice steady. I saw the strongest person I know. Keanu looked at him, pride swelling in his chest. Mason knelt beside his mother and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. Erica clung to him like she'd never let go. I'm not going anywhere, Mom, he whispered. I know, she replied, her voice shaking. Neither am I. They stayed like that for a while, the three of them in that quiet room, the storm having passed, but the weight of it still lingering in the air. Eventually, Erica stood and wiped her face, managing a faint smile. Sorry, she said to Keanu. This wasn't the visit I planned. He shook his head. It was the one that mattered. Erica walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and took a long sip. Her hand still trembled slightly, but there was strength behind the shaking now. I won't let anyone take him, she said. Not ever. Keanu nodded. He's where he belongs. And Mason, still seated on the floor, looked up with a quiet certainty in his eyes that said he already knew that too. Later that evening, after Mason had gone to bed, Erica sat on the small balcony outside the apartment, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Keanu joined her with 2 mugs of tea, offering one without a word. The city stretched out quietly below them, lights flickering like a reflection of the stars above. I used to think asking for help meant I wasn't enough, she said after a long pause. But today, when she offered to take Mason, I realized something. I didn't want help that came with shame. I wanted someone who believed in me, not someone who pitied me. Keanu nodded slowly. There's a big difference between being saved and being seen. Erica looked at him, her eyes still rimmed with emotion, but steadier now. You see us. I always have. They sat in silence, listening to the occasional honk in the distance, the low hum of a train far off. I don't know what comes next, she said. You don't have to, Keanu replied. You just keep going. Back inside, Mason stirred in his sleep, one hand still resting on the open pages of his notebook. In the margin beside his latest chapter, he had written a single line. The strongest people cry in silence and love louder than anyone ever hears. And as the night closed in around them, that love held steady, quiet, fierce, and unbreakable. The next morning, Erica stood in front of the bathroom mirror, clutching a printed job posting in one hand and her resume in the other. The paper had creases from being folded and unfolded too many times, and her thumb rubbed over the top corner like a nervous habit. She had read the listing 6 times. Medical assistant, full-time, local clinic, benefits after 90 days. Everything about it made her chest tighten with hope and fear. She looked at herself, really looked. Her hair was neatly tied back, her blouse clean and pressed, but her eyes wavered. I haven't done this in years, she whispered. From the hallway, Keanu's voice came gently. Then it's time to start again. He leaned on the doorframe with a small smile, holding a cup of tea in one hand. He'd found the posting earlier that week and had slipped it under Erica's door with nothing but a note. You've earned the next chapter. She gave a breathless laugh. You sure you're not trying to push me off a cliff? Maybe, he said. But there's a soft landing. They sat at the kitchen table later that morning. Mason was still asleep, his notebook open beside him, a pencil resting between the pages. Erica stared at the screen of her borrowed laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Keanu pulled out her resume draft and placed it beside her. "Let's go through it together." For the next hour, he helped her edit, tighten, and format her experience. They listed her previous 10 years in surgical tech, her certifications, her ability to multitask in high-pressure environments. Keanu reminded her to add the soft skills too: compassion, adaptability, patience. The qualities she used every single day, even when she thought no one noticed. By the time they clicked submit, Erica's hands were trembling again. "Too much coffee," she muttered, though Keanu knew it wasn't. "You did it," he said. "That's what matters." She closed the laptop, exhaled hard, and leaned back. "That job is a long shot," she said. "Hundreds of applicants probably." Keanu shrugged. "They've only got one you." What Erica didn't know was that Keanu had quietly made a phone call that morning to someone he'd met during a charity fundraiser months earlier. The director of that same clinic had once worked on a health access initiative Keanu supported under his foundation's name. The connection was thin, but enough to open a door. "She'll be applying this morning," Keanu had said during the call. "Her name is Erica Westwood, and I know you don't take recommendations lightly, but I also know she deserves a chance." He didn't push further. He didn't mention his name again, just left it there, like a seed in soil. Meanwhile, across the apartment, Mason sat at his desk in the corner, typing away at something of his own. When Keanu walked by, he noticed the headline on the screen: "Youth Mentorship Application Future Educators Program." "Big plans?" Keanu asked. Mason looked up with a grin. "I'm trying." Keanu leaned against the doorway. "You're already doing." Mason's fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, but his eyes were slow and thoughtful. He'd written and deleted the first paragraph 3 times already. This was more than just a form. This was the first thing he'd ever written about himself that mattered to someone else. Keanu sat down beside him, not too close, and asked, "Want help?" Mason shook his head. "Not yet. I want to get it right." He started typing again. Keanu didn't watch the words. He watched Mason's face. The way his brow furrowed, the way his lips pressed together in concentration. It was the same focus he had when he read under street lamps and jotted notes into the margins of his notebook. Only now, it was aimed at something bigger. Across the room, Erica sat folding laundry while glancing occasionally at the job board on her phone. She didn't say anything, but Keanu could see it. There was a light in her now, small but steady. By the end of the day, Mason printed the final draft of his application. Keanu offered to proofread it, and Mason agreed, sliding it across the table like it was sacred. Keanu began to read aloud. "My name is Mason Westwood, and I want to become a teacher. Not because I always felt smart, but because I know how it feels not to. When I lived in a car with my mom, we didn't have a classroom. We had a flashlight and a stack of books. But she taught me everything she could. We made our own school, wherever we were. I want to help other kids who feel invisible, because one man saw me when no one else did, and now I know how powerful that can be. If I become a mentor, I won't just teach lessons. I'll help someone feel seen. That's where learning begins." Keanu stopped reading. He looked up, eyes glistening. Mason fidgeted in his seat. "Is it too much?" Keanu shook his head. "It's perfect." Mason's shoulders relaxed. Erica leaned in, resting her chin on her hand, visibly moved. Keanu carefully placed the paper down and said, "You just told the truth. That's what makes it strong." They submitted Mason's application the next morning. No fanfare, no speeches, just a quiet click, a deep breath, and a smile that stayed on Mason's face for the rest of the day. 2 days later, Erica's phone buzzed while she was peeling carrots in the kitchen. She picked up, wiped her hands on a towel, and stepped onto the balcony. Keanu watched through the screen door as she stood silently for a moment, listening, her back straight and still. Then she turned around, her face completely changed. "I got it," she whispered, eyes wide. Keanu stood up slowly. "The job?" She nodded, laughing and crying at the same time. "Full time." They said my application stood out, that someone vouched for me. Mason jumped up from the couch and wrapped his arms around her waist. Erica dropped to her knees and held him tightly, her body shaking. Keanu stayed where he was, letting the moment belong to them. But when Erica looked up and met his eyes, she knew. And he knew she knew. That night, the three of them sat at the dinner table, eating spaghetti Mason had helped cook. It was simple, no fancy spices, no garnish, but it tasted like celebration. Erica wore a smile that hadn't left her face since the call, and Mason kept sneaking glances at her, like he was memorizing what joy looked like. After dinner, Mason pulled his laptop out and opened a blank page. He titled it New Lessons and began typing ideas for activities he wanted to create if chosen as a student mentor. Books to recommend, group games for shy kids, and a lesson plan called What Makes You Strong, inspired by his mom. Keanu watched quietly from the sofa, a soft smile on his face. He didn't need to be the center of any of this. He never had. Watching them rise, watching Mason dream out loud and Erica rediscover her footing, that was enough. Before leaving that night, Mason handed him a folded copy of his application. "For you to keep," he said. Keanu accepted it with both hands. "Thank you." When he got home, he read it again, this time in silence. One sentence echoed long after the words had ended. "I want to help other kids who feel invisible, because one man saw me when no one else did." Keanu closed his eyes and let the weight of those words sit quietly in his heart. The clock above the whiteboard ticked toward 8 o'clock a.m., the kind of quiet anticipation that fills a room just before something begins. Rows of desks sat freshly polished, each one adorned with a name tag written in careful, looping handwriting. Posters lined the walls, bright quotes about kindness, space exploration, the magic of learning. At the front of the classroom stood Mason Westwood, now 22, dressed in a blue shirt tucked neatly into dark slacks, his ID badge clipped to his belt. His hands were steady, but his heart raced. It was his first official day as a public school teacher. He took a breath and looked around the room, memorizing every corner. The books stacked in the reading nook, the paper globe in the corner, the small framed quote on his desk that read, "You only need one person to believe in you." He had written it himself. Behind the smile and professional calm, the moment weighed on him more than anyone knew, not because he doubted his place here, but because he remembered every second of what it took to arrive. From the doorway, a woman watched, with pride brimming in her chest. Erica stood with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, holding back tears. She wore a long navy dress and a soft smile. Her hair was streaked with silver now, but her posture was strong, whole. She had arrived early, wanting to see everything before the students came in, to witness the miracle that used to sleep curled in the back seat of her car. She wasn't the only one watching. In the very back row, seated quietly in a chair pulled from the hallway, was Keanu. Older now, his hair dusted with gray, wearing a simple black jacket and jeans. He hadn't told Mason he was coming. He didn't want a scene, he just wanted to see it happen, to see the story finish the way it was always meant to. The classroom door opened and the first student stepped in, nervously clutching a backpack twice their size. Mason turned immediately and smiled. "Hey there," he said warmly. "Welcome. I'm Mr. Westwood." The student blinked, surprised by the gentle tone, then smiled back. One by one, the desks filled. Kids of all kinds trickled in, some quiet, some already buzzing with energy. Mason greeted each of them the same way, with eye contact, a handshake or fist bump, and a question about something they liked: books, dinosaurs, soccer. He asked, he listened, he remembered. Keanu watched in silence. He saw the way Mason leaned in just a little when a shy boy mumbled his name. He noticed how Mason crouched beside a girl who looked like she might cry and whispered something that made her smile. The gestures weren't rehearsed, they were instinct, genuine. A quiet echo of the man sitting in the back row. Mason walked to the front of the class as the final bell rang. He cleared his throat gently. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice calm and clear. "You made it, and I'm so glad you're here." The students looked at him with a mix of curiosity and expectation. Mason smiled and let the silence stretch just enough before he spoke again. "I'm not here just to teach you math or science or how to spell chrysanthemum," he said, prompting a few confused giggles. "I'm here because I remember what it felt like to be in a room like this and wonder if anyone saw me. And I want to make sure none of you ever have to wonder that." He moved to the whiteboard and picked up a marker. "This year, we're going to read books, build projects, ask big questions, and, yes, learn how to spell really long, weird words. But more than anything, we're going to learn about each other." He wrote one word on the board in large, bold letters: belonging. "That's our word," he said, turning back to them, "because every single one of you belongs here, no matter how you learn, no matter what your story is." A hand went up in the third row. A girl with glasses and a nervous voice asked, "Even if we're not good at stuff?" Mason nodded immediately. "Especially then, because being good at something isn't what makes you important. Showing up is." Erica pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes already wet. She had watched him grow from a boy who whispered questions in the dark to a man who now made sure every voice had space to be heard. Keanu felt his throat tighten. The way Mason stood at the front of the room reminded him of the first time they met, under a street lamp in a grocery store parking lot. A boy reading by flashlight, a mother carrying everything she had left. And now, this. The class moved into introductions. Mason passed around a small rubber ball, having each student catch it and say their name, one favorite thing, and one hope for the year. Some answers were silly, some heartfelt, some whispered with uncertainty. Mason treated each one with equal care. "I love drawing. I hope I make a friend. I like soccer. I hope my dad comes to visit. I love space. I want to be an astronaut or a veterinarian." Mason smiled at every single answer. He made eye contact. He nodded. He remembered. When the ball returned to him, he held it for a second before speaking. "My name is Mr. Westwood. I love stories, especially true ones, and my hope for this year is that this classroom becomes a place where nobody feels invisible." There was a pause. Then someone clapped. One by one, the others joined in. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Mason smiled. "All right, let's get started." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of laughter, questions, and sharpened pencils. Keanu stayed in the back, his presence unnoticed by the class, but fully felt by Mason when their eyes met for a split second. Mason gave him a small nod, one of quiet gratitude, the kind that said, "I wouldn't be here without you." Keanu nodded back. He didn't need anything more. After class ended and the students filed out for lunch, chattering excitedly about planets and pet hamsters, Mason began erasing the board, humming under his breath. Erica walked up first, wrapping her son in a firm hug that lasted a few seconds longer than usual. "You were incredible," she whispered. Mason smiled. "Thanks for coming, Mom." She stepped aside as Keanu approached quietly, still holding his seat in the back like a promise he hadn't wanted to break. "You snuck in," Mason said, grinning. "I'm good at quiet," Keanu replied, "but I wasn't going to miss this." Mason looked around the classroom, then back at Keanu. "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" "Every detail." "I didn't know then," Mason said softly, "that a stranger could change your whole life." "You were never a stranger to me," Keanu replied. "You were a story waiting to be told." Mason's voice caught. "You saw me before I knew how to see myself. And you've spent every day since proving what was already there." They stood in the classroom for a long moment. No speeches, no audience, just two people whose lives had bent toward each other at exactly the right time. Then Keanu stepped back, nodding once. "Keep showing them how it's done, Mr. Westwood." Mason smiled, eyes shining. "Yes, sir." The classroom was empty when Mason finally sat down to write the letter. It was after hours, long after the last student had packed up their backpack and waved goodbye. The sun had dipped low, throwing gold across the floor tiles, and the air was still warm with the energy of a day well spent. He hadn't planned to write it, not really, but something inside him had been growing all week. A weight he couldn't name, resting quietly on his chest, making him pause just a little longer every time he passed the picture on his desk. A snapshot from years ago, faded slightly, of a boy holding a library card in one hand and a milkshake in the other. Keanu had taken it, back when things were still uncertain, and they were surviving more than living. Mason pulled out a sheet of lined paper from his drawer. Not an email, not a typed message, just pen to page, the old-fashioned way. He didn't overthink it, he just began to write. Dear Keanu, I don't know if I'll ever give you this letter. I'm writing it mostly for me. But if you're reading it, it means I found the courage to say what I've been holding in for years. He paused, the silence of the classroom wrapped around him like a blanket. Then he kept going. You didn't rescue us. That's something I need you to know. People use that word too much. You didn't swoop in and save the day like some movie character. What you did was harder than that. You stayed, quietly, gently. You showed up when nobody else did, and you never once made us feel like a charity project. You saw my mom when she didn't even see herself anymore, and you never asked her to change who she was. You just reminded her she mattered. I used to think kindness came with strings. I'd seen it before, people giving because they wanted something in return, but you never asked for anything. You were just there. Every time it counted. I don't think you know how much that shaped me. Mason stopped, blinking back something in his eyes. He reached for his water bottle, took a sip, and stared at the ceiling. He remembered the night in the diner. The warmth of the booth, the way Keanu didn't stare when Erica couldn't finish her sentence. He remembered the apartment, the quiet knock, the set of keys. The first night he'd ever slept through without waking to sirens or shivering. Back to the letter. I became a teacher because of books, because of my mom, but mostly because of you. You listened when I rambled about comets. You brought me a laptop when all I had were spiral notebooks. You made space for my voice. You made me believe it mattered. And now, every time I greet a new student, I remember how you looked at me the first time we met, like I was already whole. Mason wiped his eyes. He wasn't done yet. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you hadn't been at that bus stop, if you hadn't come back the next day, if you hadn't listened when everyone else turned away. We might still be in that car. Or worse, I might have stopped dreaming. My mom might have stopped hoping. But you didn't let that happen, and you never needed applause, you never needed credit. You just did the next kind thing. The pen hovered for a moment. Mason didn't know how to summarize what that meant. How do you thank someone for changing the course of your life without ever making it about them? You taught me that being seen is everything. That's why I became a teacher. Because kids deserve to be looked in the eye. They deserve someone who remembers their name on the first try, who notices when their hands shake or when they haven't smiled in 3 days. You didn't give me a miracle. You gave me the space to believe in my own. There were days in that car when I thought silence would swallow us. But then you started talking to me. You brought books and flashlights and apples. And most of all, you brought presents. That quiet kind. The kind that feels like shelter. He leaned back in the chair, listening to the hum of the school's heating vents kicking on. He imagined Keanu sitting on his balcony, reading the letter with a cup of tea beside him, that same calm expression he always wore when Mason spoke about his dreams. I know you don't like attention. You'd probably rather I sent this without a return address. But I need you to hear it from me. I need you to know what you did. You didn't fix us. You made us believe we could fix ourselves. That's the difference, and it's everything. People talk about changing the world. You did that. Not with a speech, not with money, but by showing up when it counted. Mason tapped the pen twice against the desk before writing the last lines. "You are the reason I sit at this desk now, not because you made it happen, because you helped me believe I could. That's the gift I try to pass on every single day. Thank you, Mason." He stared at the paper for a long while after he'd finished, not quite ready to fold it. The words sat there on the page like something alive, something that had waited years to come out. He could have left it in the drawer, could have tucked it into a folder and kept it for himself, but something in him said it was time to let it go. He folded it carefully, placed it in an envelope, and wrote Keanu's name across the front. No address, no stamp. He would hand it to him one quiet evening. No fanfare, just like always. Days later, the letter made its way to Keanu's hands. He didn't say much when Mason handed it to him outside the apartment building, just nodded, slipped it into his jacket, and thanked him with a hand on the shoulder. Mason didn't explain. He didn't need to. That night, Keanu sat in his living room, a single lamp glowing beside him. The city lights pulsed gently outside the window, distant but steady. He poured a cup of tea, turned off his phone, and opened the envelope. As he read, he didn't move. The world around him slowed. Every word drew breath into moments he had nearly forgotten. The car, the diner, the blanket, the way Erica once whispered, "No one's called me that in years." It all came rushing back, vivid and warm. When he reached the final line, he set the letter down with care. No applause, no big reaction, just a long, slow exhale. He rose quietly, walked to the small wooden box on his bookshelf, and lifted the lid. Inside were only a few things. Photos, small notes, memories he never displayed but never let go. On the underside of the lid, written in his own handwriting, were two words, "Worth everything." He placed the letter inside, closed the box, and rested his hand on the lid. Some legacies didn't need to be public. Some gratitude didn't need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes it was enough to know the story lived on, and that he had played a part in making someone else feel seen forever. The auditorium was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every breath feel louder than usual. Rows of folding chairs filled the space, occupied by educators from across the region, teachers, counselors, social workers, school administrators. The annual Community Education Conference was known for its workshops and keynotes, but this year the closing speaker was someone new. Mason Westwood adjusted the microphone at the center of the stage. He wore a soft gray blazer, sleeves rolled at the cuffs. His hair was longer now, pushed behind his ears, and he stood with calm confidence, steady but not rehearsed. A single note card rested in his pocket, though he hadn't planned to use it. He had already decided that the most important things didn't need prompts. He scanned the audience briefly. In the third row, Erica sat, eyes wide, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Next to her was his principal, a few colleagues from his school, a handful of former students, now older, invited as guests. Keanu wasn't in the room, but Mason had left a chair open in the far back row anyway. He looked down once, breathed in, and began. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice even and warm. "When I was first invited to speak here, I asked why. I'm not an expert. I've only been teaching a few years. I haven't published any research or led a statewide initiative. I just work in a classroom and try to do right by the students in front of me." He paused. A few heads nodded. "But I realized something in preparing for today. I've lived a story that many of our students are still writing, and maybe hearing it out loud could help you see the kids in your room a little differently." The room grew even quieter. "I want to tell you about the night I met a stranger. I was 10. My mom and I were living in a car in a grocery store parking lot. We had been for months. She was working nights at a motel. I was teaching myself from library books. I didn't feel poor, I just felt invisible." Mason looked out over the room. A few hands pressed tissues to eyes already. That night I was reading in the front seat with a flashlight when a man walked by. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer money. He just noticed me. And the next day he came back. He paced slightly, his hands loose by his sides. He brought books, sandwiches, warm socks, a notebook. And he kept coming back, every week. No lectures, no pressure, just a presence, a kindness that asked for nothing in return. Someone near the back let out a quiet breath. My mom once said people only saw her when they were scared she'd ask for something. But this man never looked scared. He looked steady. He made us feel seen. Mason's voice softened. Never told me what to become. He never gave me the answers. He just showed up, over and over. And that taught me everything I needed to know about how learning actually works. He paused. That's the kind of teacher I try to be. I teach now in a public school not far from where we used to park, Mason continued, his voice gaining quiet strength. Every morning, I open the door to students who carry more than backpacks. They carry silence, fear, doubt, and they carry dreams, too. He stopped in place, letting the silence carry the weight of his words. I meet students who haven't had breakfast, who haven't been believed in, who haven't been called by their right name in months. I meet students who are brilliant, but afraid to raise their hand. Students who stare out the window because what's waiting at home is louder than what's being said at the board. A woman in the front row nodded slowly, her eyes misty behind her glasses. When I see those kids, Mason said, I think about that parking lot. I think about the flashlight, the book, and the man who never needed to know my last name to know I mattered. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage now, not to be dramatic, but to feel closer to the room, to close the space between his truth and theirs. I never use his name when I tell this story, he said softly, because it was never about his identity. It was about the lesson. A few people leaned forward in their seats. So today, Mason said, I want to tell you what he taught me, not with words, but with the way he lived. He counted on his fingers as he spoke, not as a list, but as a rhythm. Be gentle first, and ask questions later. 2. Silence can be sacred, but presence speaks volumes. 3. Don't assume what someone needs. Sometimes it's not money. Sometimes it's a conversation, a smile, or just someone who stays. 4. Never underestimate the power of being believed in. And 5. You don't have to change the world to change someone's life. Just show up. The audience was still, completely still. Mason walked back toward the podium and took a quiet breath. I didn't have a school building when I first became a student. I had the back seat of a sedan, a flashlight, and a mother who never stopped trying. But what changed everything for me wasn't a curriculum. It was the stranger who saw my future when all I had was a flashlight and a book. A quiet gasp came from somewhere near the back. Hale didn't talk about dreams, Mason added. He just made room for them. He looked down at his note card, then tucked it away in his pocket without reading it. You've probably never seen his face, you've never heard him speak at a conference, but I carry him into my classroom every single day. Every time I remember to pause, every time I wait that extra second after calling a student's name, every time I stay a little longer after the bell. He glanced at Erica. Her shoulders were trembling now, but her smile hadn't faded. I'm here today not because someone saved me, Mason said, his voice deep with emotion, but because someone saw me. Someone believed I could carry myself the rest of the way. He looked back out over the crowd. And I hope, more than anything, that we all become that stranger to someone else. Mason stepped back from the microphone, letting his final words settle into the silence. No one moved. A few audience members wiped their cheeks. Some looked down at their notepads, no longer writing but simply sitting in the moment. Then, slowly, the room rose to its feet. The applause wasn't thunderous or dramatic. It was warm, real, and full of reverence. not for a performance, but for a truth that touched every heart in the room. Mason didn't bow or wave. He simply nodded, hand over his heart, and stepped down from the stage. He made his way back to Erica, who embraced him with trembling arms. "You did it," she whispered. He hugged her tightly. "We did." Outside, as the conference began to dissolve into breakout sessions and hallway conversations, Mason found a quiet bench by the building's side entrance. He sat down, letting the sunlight touch his face. He didn't hear the footsteps until they were close. Keanu stood beside him, hands in his pockets, quiet as ever. "I wasn't in the room," Keanu said gently, "but I heard every word." Mason looked up and smiled. "You always do." Keanu sat beside him, and for a long time, they said nothing. Eventually, Mason pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "They asked me to write a follow-up for publication." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "What did you title it?" Mason looked down at the page, then up again. "The Stranger Who Stayed." Keanu nodded once, and they both sat there, in the soft spring light, two people who had once shared a parking lot and a blanket, now sharing something even quieter, a story that had changed more than just their own lives. The drive to the shelter was quiet. Mason kept the windows cracked, letting the breeze carry in the scent of distant ocean air and early blooming jasmine. He had taken the day off, not for rest, but for something deeper, a return to where it all began, though he'd never been here before. He turned onto a narrow side street tucked behind a row of shops and churches. At the end of the block stood a modest building with clean white walls, an arched doorway, and a painted wooden sign that read, "Ruth's Blanket." The words were hand-lettered, with a soft blue underline that curved like the edge of a river. The place didn't announce itself loudly, it simply welcomed. Mason parked and stepped out, tucking a wrapped book under his arm. He'd called ahead but asked them not to say too much. He wanted this visit to feel human, not formal, not scheduled, just sincere. Inside, the space felt more like a home than a shelter. Warm light spilled from old lamps. Framed photos lined the hallway, pictures of people laughing, hugging, rebuilding. And in the far corner of the common room sat a woman in her late 70s, wrapped in a soft shawl, her eyes sharp and kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Rune?" Mason asked gently. She looked up, and something in her face lit with quiet surprise. "That's me," she said, setting down her tea. "And you are—" "My name is Mason Westwood," he said. I think I've been waiting a long time to meet you." She studied him for a moment, then smiled. "You're the teacher. The one with the article about the man at the bus stop." Mason chuckled, slightly embarrassed. "Word travels fast. Especially when the man you're talking about used to sit right there," she said, pointing to the very chair he had chosen. Keanu never said much, but when he mentioned you, his eyes softened. Mason sat down across from her. "I've heard about what you did, the blanket, the way you gave something even when you had almost nothing." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "It wasn't about what I gave, it was about what he needed. That's what people miss when they talk about generosity. It's not the blanket, it's the seeing." Mason nodded, feeling her words settle deep. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "not just for him, for me, because your moment with him, it created a ripple. That kindness became something bigger." Ruth's hands folded over her tea mug. "Funny thing is, I never thought anyone would remember. I wasn't trying to be a story." "Neither was I," Mason said softly. They talked for nearly an hour, trading pieces of Keanu's legacy like puzzle parts from different corners of his life. Ruth told him about the first day the shelter opened, how she cried when she saw her name on the plaque. Mason told her about the first time he stood in front of a classroom and felt like he belonged. At some point, Ruth reached for a second cup and poured tea for Mason. No ceremony, just comfort. "People always ask about the blanket," she said, "but it wasn't really mine." "What do you mean?" She smiled. "It belonged to someone who helped me once. I just passed it forward." Mason felt his throat catch. Mason leaned forward, the weight of her words settling over him like quiet rain. You passed it forward, he echoed. And it became something that changed both our lives. Ruth nodded slowly. Funny, isn't it? A piece of wool from the back of a thrift store shelf ends up part of a chain that stretches through years and cities. Most people wouldn't call that valuable. But it was, Mason said, because it was given when it mattered most. They sat in thoughtful silence for a while, the room humming with the soft sounds of life, distant conversation, the clink of a teacup, footsteps on tile. I brought something, Mason said after a moment, reaching into his bag. He pulled out the book, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a simple string. He handed it to Ruth, who looked at it with gentle curiosity. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I wrote," he said. "Not published, not public, just a copy I printed myself. It's called Lessons from the Passenger Seat: How a Homeless Kid Became a Teacher." Ruth opened the wrapping slowly, as if unwrapping more than just paper. She ran her fingers across the soft cover. The title was printed in bold letters, and below it, a drawing of a small car with an open book on its dashboard. She flipped open the cover and paused. Inside, Mason had written, "To the woman who gave a blanket and the man who stayed to listen. You didn't just keep us warm. You reminded us we were still human." Ruth blinked several times, then closed the book carefully and pressed it to her chest. "No one's ever written something like this for me," she said, her voice trembling. "You were part of the beginning," Mason said gently, "and I thought it belonged here." He stood and motioned toward a wall at the far end of the room. There, beneath a warm spotlight, was a display called the blanket wall. Dozens of blankets hung folded or framed, some new, some patched, some frayed with years. Each had a story attached. But at the center was a glass case holding a faded wool blanket. "I wanted to leave it under that one," Mason said, "if that's okay." Ruth smiled through tears. "That's more than okay. That's exactly right." Together they walked to the wall, and Mason placed the book beneath the case, gently, like placing a stone at the foot of a memorial. A volunteer nearby added a small card, "Donated by M. Westwood, Lessons from the Passenger Seat." Ruth stood beside him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I used to think no one remembered people like me," she whispered. "But now, maybe that's not true." Mason looked at her with deep warmth. "You became a legacy, Ruth. Not because of the blanket, but because you didn't look away when someone needed you." She looked over at him, her eyes misty and strong. "And you kept the chain going," she said. "That's all any of us can do." As they stood together at the blanket wall, a few staff members and residents paused nearby, reading the plaque, glancing at the new book, nodding quietly. No one interrupted. The space seemed to hold its breath, honoring something unspoken but deeply understood. Mason turned to Ruth. "Do you ever think about how far it all went?" Ruth chuckled softly. "I used to think the world was too big for people like me to matter, but then someone handed me a thermos of tea without asking for anything back. And everything changed." They walked back to the chairs by the window, sat down and finished the last of the tea. The afternoon sun angled through the glass, catching motes of dust that danced like tiny blessings in the light. Before he left, Mason shook Ruth's hand. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him firmly. "Keep writing. Keep teaching. And tell them the truth." "What truth?" "That kindness is never wasted." He nodded, then turned and walked down the hallway, passing the photos, the doors, the quiet rooms filled with new beginnings. At the entrance, he paused one last time and looked back. The building was small. The impact was not. And somewhere behind that wall of blankets and quiet bravery, a woman, once forgotten, had helped a boy find his voice. And together, their story had become part of something that would outlast both of them. The morning started like any other. Mason unlocked his classroom door just after 7:30, placing a stack of freshly printed worksheets on each desk. Sunlight poured in through the tall windows, painting golden rectangles across the tiled floor. He scribbled the date on the whiteboard and smiled to himself as he added the day's theme: Gratitude in small moments. The first bell rang and students filtered in with backpacks, sneakers squeaking, and the usual chorus of chatter. Mason moved between desks with the ease of a man who'd grown into this rhythm. He checked on a girl who'd missed breakfast, gave a thumbs up to a boy finishing a drawing, and crouched beside another student who struggled to find their pencil. Then the door opened again, quietly, without urgency. A few heads turned, then a few more, and suddenly the room stilled. Mason looked up. Standing in the doorway, dressed in a weathered black jacket and a soft gray scarf, was Keanu Reeves. He looked older now. His hair was streaked with silver, his eyes kind and slightly tired. He didn't say a word. The silence lasted only a moment before Mason's face broke into a warm, astonished smile. "You made it," Mason said. Keanu nodded once. "If you've got a seat." Mason gestured to the stool beside the whiteboard. "Always." Whispers fluttered through the room. A few students stared with wide eyes, mouths parted. One boy raised his hand but forgot to say anything. Mason chuckled. "Yes, that's who you think it is. And no, he's not here for a movie audition." That got a laugh. "He's someone I've known since I was about your age," Mason said. "And today, he's our guest." Keanu stepped forward and gave a small wave. "I'm just visiting. You've got a good one here, be kind to him." Mason looked at his students. "Okay, time for today's lesson. But I think it's going to come from both of us." The class leaned in as Mason and Keanu guided a conversation about courage, kindness, and second chances. No speeches, just stories, real ones. Mason told them about the first book he read by flashlight. Keanu told them about a woman who once gave him a blanket and asked nothing in return. They talked about invisible people and how being seen can change everything. The students asked questions, some curious, some profound. One asked Keanu what he did when he felt like giving up. He answered, "I didn't, but only because someone else believed I didn't have to." Another asked Mason how he knew he'd be a good teacher. He paused, looked at Keanu, and said, "I didn't. I just remembered what it felt like when someone taught me without a classroom." The bell rang far too soon. The students stood and clapped, spontaneous and heartfelt. Keanu smiled and nodded politely, but it was Mason they looked at the longest. After the last student had filed out, the room returned to silence. Mason erased the board slowly, then turned around. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Keanu shrugged gently. It felt like time. They left the classroom and walked down the quiet hallway side by side. The school was in its post-bell hum, classrooms buzzing behind closed doors, footsteps echoing faintly in the distance. Neither of them spoke right away. Outside, the morning air was cool and crisp. A breeze tugged gently at the tree branches along the edge of the schoolyard. The grass still held traces of dew, and the sunlight filtered through the canopy like gold dust. Mason led Keanu toward a quiet spot beneath an old oak tree near the playground, the same place he often took his class for outdoor reading. It was a simple space, shaded and worn, but peaceful. They sat down on a low wooden bench facing the open yard. For a moment, they just sat. Mason looked ahead, then down at his hands. "I still carry it, you know." Keanu turned to him. "Carry what?" "The flashlight," Mason said, his voice low. "Not the actual one. I lost that years ago. But what it meant. That night. The book. The cold. You walking up like I wasn't invisible. It stayed with me." Keanu nodded slowly. "You always lit your own way, Mason. I just noticed." Mason glanced at him. "You were the first person who didn't try to change us. You didn't fix things. You just stayed. That's what mattered most." Keanu smiled. "I didn't need to fix anything. You and your mother were already doing the hardest thing, surviving with dignity. I just wanted to make sure you didn't have to do it alone." They watched a group of kids playing in the distance. One boy was helping another tie his shoe. A girl ran up with a book clutched in her hand, waving it like a victory flag. Mason sighed. "Sometimes I think about how different it all could have been if you hadn't come back. If I'd stopped believing someone like me could belong in a place like this. Keanu tilted his head. You didn't stop believing, you paused. That's different. Mason let out a soft laugh. Still feels like a miracle. Keanu looked toward the school. It's not a miracle. It's what happens when someone keeps showing up. The breeze shifted slightly, rustling the leaves above them. Mason leaned back. You never asked to be part of my story. You never asked to be part of mine, Keanu said. But here we are. They sat in silence again, letting the truth of it hang gently between them. Not heavy, not sad, just full. Full of years, of memories, of the kind of gratitude that didn't need to be said aloud to be understood. Then Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. I found this again a few weeks ago, he said, handing it over. Mason unfolded it slowly. It was the first letter he'd ever written Keanu, the one he'd sent years ago, the one with the line, You didn't rescue us. You reminded us we were worth rescuing ourselves. Mason looked up, his eyes misting. You kept it? Keanu smiled. It's in a box labeled Worth Everything. Mason folded it again, more carefully this time. I still mean every word. I know, Keanu said. So do I. The lunch bell rang in the distance. Students began to spill into the schoolyard, laughter echoing across the open space. Mason and Keanu stayed beneath the oak tree, unnoticed by most, part of the stillness that quietly observed the world turning. A few students waved to Mason from afar and he waved back. One boy called out, Thanks for this morning, Mr. Westwood. Mason smiled. Anytime. Keanu watched him with a soft gaze. They don't know how lucky they are, but one day they will. Mason looked down, a trace of humility in his voice. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough. You are, Keanu said, because you haven't forgotten who you were. Mason nodded slowly. That's what keeps me grounded. The car, the cold nights, my mom humming to herself while she tried to stay awake at traffic lights. The blanket. He paused, then added, You. Keanu turned to him, his voice quiet but firm. What you've built, that's your legacy. Not because of where you came from, but because you remembered what it meant to be seen. They stood, brushing the grass from their clothes. Mason looked around once more. You'll come back again? Keanu gave a small smile. If you'll have me. Always. They shook hands, but the handshake turned into something deeper, an embrace that carried the weight of years, of silence, of everything they never needed to say. As Keanu walked toward the parking lot, Mason remained under the tree, watching the children run and shout and laugh. One hand rested in his pocket. Wrapped inside was a folded paper flashlight, something he'd made years ago for his first lesson plan. He still carried it, not as a memory, but as a promise. The email arrived quietly one morning. Mason opened it before school, standing at his kitchen counter with a mug of coffee in one hand and his lesson plan in the other. The subject line read, Invitation, Launch Event, Private. He clicked it open. The message was simple, elegant, and unsigned. Just an address, a date, and a single line. You taught the lesson, now let's pass it on. It took Mason a moment to understand. But when he saw the event title at the bottom, the Mason Westwood Fund for Future Educators, his heart caught in his chest. He sat down slowly, reading the line again. Not a fund by Mason Westwood, a fund for future educators, named after him. He blinked at the screen, feeling something stir inside that he hadn't felt since the night he held his first teaching certificate in his hands. A kind of full-circle warmth. Not about recognition, about purpose. 2 weeks later, Mason stood in a small event space tucked inside a renovated library downtown. The room wasn't filled with reporters or cameras, just folding chairs, a podium, a soft spread of tea and cookies. Quiet people, real people, donors, educators. A few students in their early 20s, sitting near the front with wide, uncertain eyes. And in the center of the front row, Keanu sat beside Erica. Erica now wore a sharp navy blazer over her scrubs. She had taken on the role of lead nurse at a community clinic. Her hair was still streaked with silver, but it gave her an air of wisdom that only added to her presence. She didn't need to speak. Just being there said everything. Mason took the podium. He wasn't nervous. He didn't have notes. He just looked out at the people gathered and began to speak. I was a kid in a car once, with a flashlight and a book, and the only thing louder than the silence was the feeling that no one saw me. A few heads nodded. But then someone did. And they didn't fix my life. They didn't drop off a miracle. They just came back. Again and again. And because of that, I never stopped believing that maybe I mattered. He paused, eyes landing on one of the students in the front row, a young woman in a worn gray hoodie, hands clenched nervously in her lap. This fund isn't about me. It's about the kids who are still waiting in the dark, the ones who read by flashlight, who don't have a desk, who think dreams are for other people. He smiled gently. This fund says you belong in the front of the classroom too. It says you have something to give. And most of all, it says you're not invisible. Mason stepped back and gestured toward the sign behind him. The Mason Westwood Fund for Future Educators from Forgotten Places. He turned toward Erica and gave a small bow. This is because of you, Mom. Erica pressed her hand over her heart, eyes full. Then Mason looked at Keanu. And because of the man who never asked to be named, but who taught me the power of seeing someone before they believe in themselves. After the applause faded, Mason stepped down from the podium and took a seat beside Keanu. For a while, they just listened, as the next speaker, a scholarship coordinator, outlined how the fund would work. It would provide full tuition, mentorship, and living stipends for homeless or housing insecure youth who aspired to become educators. No press releases, no application fees, just quiet access for those who'd been told no far too many times. Across the room, Erica leaned over to one of the student applicants seated near her. They had just introduced themselves as a first-generation college hopeful, unsure if they'd ever afford a single semester. Erica handed them a card with her clinic's name on it and said, "If you ever need help, don't wait. Start with me." Keanu smiled as he watched her. She's the right person for this. Mason nodded. She's the reason I made it through the worst parts. Strongest person I know. She always was, Keanu said. She just needed someone to remind her. The room shifted into small conversations. Volunteers brought out pitchers of iced tea and trays of soft sandwiches. Mason walked through the rows, answering questions, greeting guests, pausing to speak with a man who had once run the shelter Mason stayed in as a child. At the back of the room, a long table was lined with blank cards. A sign read, "Leave a note for the next educator." The idea had come from Mason himself. He believed the first gift wasn't money, it was encouragement. He picked up a pen and wrote his own card first. "You are not broken, you are beginning. Keep going. Mason." Beside his card, others began to appear. "Your story matters. Share it loud. You belong in the front of the classroom. Some student will remember your name forever." Later, Mason returned to Keanu's side. They stepped out onto the rooftop terrace of the library, the city skyline stretching quietly into the early evening. "I wanted to call it something else," Mason admitted, "but the board insisted it carry my name." Keanu tilted his head. "It's fitting. It still feels strange. It'll feel less strange when the first student sends you their photo in a cap and gown." Mason laughed. "That's what I'm holding out for." He turned to Keanu, more serious now. "Thank you for letting this be quiet, for not turning it into something flashy." Keanu looked out over the horizon. "Some of the most powerful things are the ones no one sees. You taught me that." Mason smiled. "You taught me first." Below them, the lights in the conference room began to dim. The students were lingering by the card table, reading each message, some holding them like letters from a future they hadn't dared to picture before. Mason watched them with a full heart. He didn't see potential. He saw mirrors. He saw himself. And for the first time, he realized something. He wasn't just the product of someone else's kindness. He had become the reason someone else would believe again. Before the evening ended, one final name was called. Erica Westwood was announced as the fund's first official advisor, a role that would allow her to support scholarship recipients not only medically, but personally, offering mentorship, guidance, and someone who truly understood where they were starting from. The room stood to applaud as she stepped forward. She didn't give a long speech, just 3 sentences. I used to be someone people overlooked. Now I help them get seen, and there is no greater honor. She stepped down, her smile wide, and hugged Mason as the crowd sat again. By nightfall, the event had wrapped. People lingered in the corners, trading emails, promising follow-ups, whispering things like, "This is what real change looks like." Keanu found Mason by the elevator, ready to leave. "You did good," he said. Mason gave a humble shrug. "We did." "No," Keanu replied. "This was yours, your voice, your journey." Mason looked at the logo on the brochure again, the Mason Westwood Fund, and for once, he didn't feel uncomfortable. He felt responsible, in the best way. "Now it begins," Mason said. Keanu nodded. "Now it continues." They stepped outside into the cooling night air, where stars blinked faintly above the city. Another door had opened, and behind it, more than a scholarship waited. There was hope, there was healing, and there was the quiet, steady ripple of a life that had once been nearly lost, now becoming the current that would carry others forward. The old grocery store lot hadn't changed much. The light poles were still slightly rusted near the base, leaning a little, like they were tired from holding everything up all these years. The asphalt was cracked in familiar places, weeds peeking through like they'd never stopped growing. Keanu pulled into a space near the back of the lot, where the street lights cast long shadows in the late afternoon sun. He turned off the engine and sat for a moment with his hands resting on the steering wheel. There wasn't a reason to be here, not officially. No speech, no meeting, no schedule. Just memory. It had been over a decade since that cold night when he'd first seen a boy reading alone in a parked car, flashlight balanced on his knee, book open in his lap, determination glowing through exhaustion. That boy had changed the way Keanu understood giving. It wasn't about what you gave. It was about how you showed up. He stepped out of the car slowly, jacket zipped, scarf pulled loose around his neck. The air was cool but gentle, spring just starting to show itself in the scattered buds on the trees bordering the lot. He walked toward the edge, where an old metal bench sat beneath a street lamp that buzzed faintly overhead. The paint was chipped, but the bench held its weight like it always had. Keanu sat down, leaned back, and closed his eyes. He let the sounds come in waves, the faint rumble of carts, the automatic door of the grocery store hissing open and shut, a mother's voice calling to a child, tires crunching over uneven pavement. It was the same soundtrack as it had always been, but now it carried meaning. He thought of Mason, of Erica, of Ruth. He thought of the fund, of the letters, of the way Mason had looked standing at that podium, not like a former kid in need, but like a man who had become the answer to someone else's question. Keanu had never wanted recognition, but sitting here now, the quiet made it feel right, like everything had gone exactly where it needed to go. He opened his eyes, and then he saw it. Across the lot, 3 rows away, was a car he hadn't noticed when he arrived. It was an older sedan, one headlight fogged, paint faded from years in the sun, and inside, in the passenger seat, was a boy. He couldn't have been older than 10, maybe 11. A paperback book was open on his lap, one leg tucked beneath him. A flashlight rested on the armrest, casting a soft glow across the pages. The boy was completely absorbed, mouthing the words as he read. His shoes were off, folded neatly beside him. Keanu's breath caught in his chest. It wasn't the same boy, of course, but it was the same picture, the same posture, The same silence. He watched for a moment longer. The boy turned a page slowly, almost reverently, as if each one held something sacred. A woman appeared near the car, holding 2 plastic grocery bags. She paused, looking at her son through the windshield. Her shoulders were heavy, and her eyes carried the look Keanu had seen before. Exhaustion layered with pride, and the fear of not having enough. She opened the door. The boy looked up and smiled. Keanu stood. And this time, he didn't walk away. He crossed the lot slowly, each step deliberate. Not rushed, not hesitant either, just steady. The kind of walk that signaled respect, no agenda, no assumptions. The mother was adjusting something in the back seat when Keanu came into view. She looked up quickly, her body tensing just slightly in that instinctive way people do when a stranger approaches in a parking lot. But Keanu stopped a few feet back, offering space, his hands visible at his sides. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said gently. "I just noticed your son's book. That's a good one." The boy looked up from the passenger seat, blinking as he adjusted to the real world outside the page. The flashlight was still on, balanced between his leg and the door. The mother looked down, unsure. "It's one of the ones he got from the library yesterday," she said, her voice guarded but polite. Keanu nodded. "Looks like he's really into it." The boy sat up straighter, a little curious now. "It's Holes," he said. "I've read it twice already." "That's one of my favorites," Keanu replied. "Louis Sasher tells a great story." The mother's posture softened just a little. She stepped forward, still cautious but no longer wary. "Can I help you with something?" Keanu smiled. "No, ma'am, I just saw something familiar, that's all. Thought I'd say hello." The boy looked between them. "Did you read a lot when you were little?" Keanu tilted his head. "I did, especially when things didn't feel very steady." The boy nodded like he understood more than most kids his age. "What's your name?" Keanu asked. "Julianne," the boy replied. "That's a strong name." Julian smiled and turned the book to show him the page he was on. "He just found the lipstick tube. I think it's going to change the whole story." Keanu leaned in, not too close, just enough to glance. "You might be right." The mother shifted a little. "We're just staying here for a bit, trying to get things figured out." Keanu looked her in the eyes. "I've been here before, right here." She studied him, trying to place the face. But there was no arrogance in his tone, no pity, just a calm understanding. "I'm glad you have each other," he added. She glanced at her son, then back at Keanu. "Me too." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small card. It was simple, no flashy design, just a name and a phone number. "If you ever need a quiet place to land, someone I know runs a shelter. No pressure, just an open door." She took it carefully. "Thank you," she said. Keanu turned to Julian. "Finish that chapter, it's a good one." "I will," Julian said. Keanu began to step away but paused after a few feet. He turned back toward the boy. "Hey, Julian." "Yeah. You keep reading like that, someday you'll write your own story." Julian grinned, his fingers already back on the page. And Keanu, heart full, walked back to the bench. The sky above had started to shift, streaked with soft orange and pink as the sun dipped behind the edge of the city skyline. Keanu sat back on the bench and closed his eyes again, this time not to remember, but to simply feel the moment. Behind him, the car doors shut. Julian's mother had climbed into the driver's seat. They were pulling away slowly now, the boy still reading, flashlight balanced the same way Mason used to do. As they passed by, Julian glanced up and gave a small wave. Keanu returned it, his smile quiet and warm. He sat there a little longer, watching the last of the daylight melt into dusk. He didn't feel the need to rush home. The evening could wait. He reached into his coat pocket again and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was one of the cards from Mason's scholarship fund table. He read the words again. "You are not broken, you are beginning. Keep going." He held the card between his fingers, thinking of how many stories had started in places like this. Parking lots, shelters, bus stops. Not places of endings, but places where something powerful quietly takes root. He stood, slipping the card back into his pocket. As he walked to his car, he took one last look at the spot where Julian had been. The bench, the book, the quiet kindness exchanged without expectation. The cycle had begun again. And this time, Keanu didn't need to wonder what came next. He already knew. The room was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of a small desk lamp. Outside, the wind rustled faintly through tree branches, but inside, everything was still. Keanu sat in a worn armchair by the window, a steaming cup of tea resting on the table beside him. The light pooled gently over the open book in his lap. The cover read, "Lessons from the Passenger Seat." It was Mason's book, no longer just a self-published manuscript passed quietly to Ruth, but now a real volume, hardcover, glossed title, a symbol of everything that had grown out of that parking lot night so many years ago. Keanu ran his fingers slowly across the spine before opening to the first page. The dedication read, "To the man who saw me in the dark." Keanu exhaled slowly. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just breathed it in. The room around him was lined with quiet reminders. A framed photo of Ruth standing beside the blanket wall. A small card from Mason's scholarship fund tucked near the bookshelf. A worn library card from decades ago. He had kept these things not for display, but for memory, for meaning. He turned the pages slowly, not reading the full chapters, just skimming the moments. Descriptions of Mason's first lesson plan, his late-night doubts, the first letter he'd ever received from a student who said, "You made me feel like I could matter." Keanu stopped at a passage where Mason described the night he first realized he wanted to teach. "I didn't want to be a hero, I just wanted to be someone who stayed." That line held weight, because that's what it had always been about. Keanu looked out the window, eyes scanning the empty street below. The same stillness he felt in the parking lot lingered here too. A sacred calm that asked nothing but awareness. Sometimes the world didn't need more answers. Sometimes it just needed one person to pause and see. Keanu leaned back in the chair, letting the book rest gently on his chest. His eyes stayed fixed on the window, watching the amber streetlight flicker across the sidewalk outside. In the distance, a child's voice laughed and then faded, and for a moment, time seemed to fold in on itself. He remembered the first night he'd seen Mason, curled up in that old car, flashlight flickering, face lit not just by the bulb, but by something inside him that had refused to dim. He'd looked fragile then, small, quiet. But beneath that quiet was a presence. That same presence was now rippling across classrooms, across shelter walls, across names that had once been forgotten. The story hadn't ended. It had multiplied. Keanu looked down at the book again, then slowly stood and walked across the room to a narrow bookshelf near the corner. He slid Mason's book onto the middle shelf, next to a journal from Ruth, a folded thank you note from a student in the scholarship fund, and the envelope that once carried Mason's letter. The one that read, "You never treated us like a project." It didn't look like a shrine. It looked like a life built one moment at a time, quietly, faithfully, without applause. He walked back to the chair and sat again, this time not to reflect, but to listen. In his mind, he could still hear the line Mason had written in his keynote speech. "You don't have to change the world. You just have to show up for one person." That's how the world begins to shift. Keanu folded his hands and whispered softly, "One person, one light." He closed his eyes, letting the peace of it settle deep inside. Then, in the final silence, came the voice of his heart, steady and sure. Sometimes all someone needs is to be seen, not saved, not fixed, just seen. The lamp beside him flickered slightly, drawing Keanu's gaze. He reached over and turned it off, letting the natural light from the moon spill through the window. He didn't need brightness to see clearly. On the wall across from him, a simple quote had been pinned up months ago. Mason had sent it in a letter, cut from the edge of a program from the scholarship launch. It read, "Be the warmth someone never expects." Keanu whispered the words aloud. They weren't a command. They were a reminder. Outside, a car passed by slowly, tires hissing along the pavement. Somewhere, a radio played faintly through an open window. Life continued, unseen, unstaged, exactly how he preferred it. He reached for the mug beside him, still warm, took a sip, let it sit on his tongue. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. This was never about being a hero. It was about paying attention. It was about what happened when you didn't turn away. As his gaze drifted back to the bookshelf, to the letter, to the card that read, "Keep going," he thought of all the people out there who didn't know their impact. The ones who offered a hand, a blanket, a ride, a kind word, and walked away, never knowing what that gesture became. That was the truth that mattered most. The impact we don't see. The lives we change without knowing. The futures that unfold because of a moment of presence. Keanu looked directly ahead, voice quiet but resolute. If this story moved you, share it. He let the words hang. Not because it's dramatic, not because it's polished, but because someone out there might be sitting in their car tonight, wondering if anyone would notice if they disappeared. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out. You never know when you'll be the person who changes someone's life just by paying attention. And somewhere, across a city street, across a school hallway, across a quiet parking lot, another light turned on.